All right. So, um, you know what? Can I do something else first? I want to do, we need to look at what the definition of agricultural land is. So, use value program, in order to be eligible, you either need to be managed forest land or you need to be agricultural land. Agricultural land is any land exclusive of any house site enacted use to grow hay or cultivated crops, pasture livestock, cultivate trees bearing edible fruit, or produce an annual maple product, and that is 25 acres or more in size, except as provided down below, which we'll get to in a minute. An agricultural land shall include buffer zones as defined by the RAPs. There shall be a presumption that the land is used for ag purposes if it's owned by a farmer as part of the overall farm unit. It is used by a farmer, again, farmer, and it has produced an annual gross income from the sale of farm crops in one of two or three of five calendar years preceding of at least 2,000 for parcels of up to 25 acres and $75 an acre for each acre over 25. Okay, key things in this definition. First sentence, it's land used for hay, cultivated crops, pasture livestock, cultivate trees bearing edible fruit, or produce an annual maple product. So it doesn't say, you basically have to have some sort of end product, crops, livestock, trees, fruit, maple. So it would not apply to the management of equines, the management of other types of livestock. And then there's that presumption that it's ag land if it's owned by a farmer or if it's leased to a farmer. So what is a farmer? And that is what this bill, H-273, it's two things. It amends the definition of farmer and it amends the definition or what is eligible as agricultural land. So a farmer currently has to earn at least 50% of their annual gross income from the business of farming, as defined by the Internal Revenue Code, or they are producing farm crops that are processed in a farm facility situated on land enrolled by the farmer, and whose gross income from the sale of the processed farm products is going to, when added together, equals at least 25% of the farmer's annual gross income. And for a processor, they had to produce on the farm a minimum of 75% of the farm crops processed in the farm facility. So like, stop there. Right now, you can be a farmer who has 50% of their income from farming, or you could be a processor who makes 50% of their income from farming and processing, provided that 75% of the farm crops processed are from your facility, from your farm. But now you're going to add that a farmer is someone who earns at least 25% of the farmer's income from the raising, feeding, or management of equines. I believe you heard testimony that the raising, management, and feeding of equines is considered farming under the RAPs and is exempt from regulation under Act 250 as farming, and is exempt from regulation from land use as farming, but it doesn't qualify. The management and feeding doesn't qualify for as agricultural land in use value. And this would allow that to be the case.
Question? Mike, how do they define farmer when, say, it's a married couple who owns a farm and farms together, files jointly, for example? With a Schedule F, can two people be the farmer?
Schedule F, they'll probably look at that.
You can only put one person on Schedule F.
Yeah, for the farm.
And here it's farmer's income, so it's that one individual then? It's not the farm's income, it's the farmer's income that's.
Well, that depends on how your farm is organized. If you're going to, I mean, there's LLCs, there's S corps, there's a couple that are just regular corps.
Mhm.
And they would say that their business is from farming, so. Partnerships, same thing. And then the next thing.
Sorry, another question.
I'm so sorry, Mike. I'm okay. I am co-sponsor of this bill, and I am just thinking about the term management. Does that mean if they have a writing business or a trail business? That's totally okay. That's what that is.
Yes.
Great.
And that phrase is from Act 250 and the RAP definition of farm.
Okay, great. Because horses themselves don't really produce an agricultural product, but those are included in the definition of what could be part of the definition of.
Right. Now a person who raises them is a farmer. And remember, let me find it. You are pasturing your livestock and it's owned by a farmer. And so horses are livestock. Now it's owned by a farmer because they're raising, managing, or feeding. You could go a little bit further and bootstrap and say agricultural land means land exclusive of any house site, et cetera, used for the raising, feeding, or management of equines. And then also include that as who a farmer is, but and Jill from PVR would probably look at this and make recommendations as well. But that's the concept of lowering the income threshold for all farmers from 50 to 25. Also for those farmers that are also processing, lowering that from 50 to 25. And allowing a person who is raising, managing, or feeding equines to be considered a farmer for the purposes of use value. Then there's a second aspect of the bill which changes the penalty for the land use change tax. Currently, the penalty is 10% of the full fair market value of the changed land determined without regard to the use value appraisal. So it would be in 273 reduced from 10 to 6% of the full market value. There will be some revenue impacts from that, obviously. And so talking to JFO, generally how much ag land is removed on average in a year, reducing from 10 to 6, what that revenue impact will be.
Yeah.
The other revenue impact is allowing equines into the program. And whether or not that will have a drawdown on multiple funds. And how so?
We were discussing this earlier. Will JFO do that full analysis for us before the bill gets to Ways and Means?
Yes. They should. Well, sometimes they won't do a fiscal note because they don't want to do a fiscal note for a bill. But on this one, this is clearly
Revenue.
it's a fiscal bill.
Yeah.
And so they should do a fiscal note for this, and they should do it for you when you request. I can do that. I can make that request for you.
Thank you. Yeah, save us the trouble.
Thank you. Mr. O'Grady. I believe, and tell me if I'm mistaken, that if a farmer wants to make an accessory building for value-added products, they're exempt from Act 250 if it's 51% of their product.
Yeah, I have to go look. I think basically the concept that value-added building may be exempt from Act 250 is yes. I have to go and refresh my memory about the criteria.
So if it is 51%, why do we have it here to be current use? It had to be 75%, shouldn't we? Would it be wrong of us to try to meld, to keep those numbers in line with each other?
I mean, it's not a bad concept. Someone asked me this morning in Senate Ag, why are these programs all across statute different? Like, and I'm like, because they're all different programs. And different committees at different bienniums looked at them and made different policy decisions and didn't do that in uniformity or with consistency across all the statutes. So you get variations to the point that there's about 20 different definitions of farming or agricultural production in statute. And so this is probably one of those things that when they were doing who's a farmer in finance or ways and means, they set it at 75 and didn't think, well, and used to the accessory on farm came after this. So there was just no connection to make that change. It's not a bad concept.
Like, what happens with that rental land provision in here? So if I'm a landowner, but I'm not a farmer, and I rent, 5 acres to Michelle who grows shiitake mushrooms on them, she makes a bunch of money on that.
You get the tax break.
Okay. And that can be less than 25 acres. Like, she could just have a.
If she, right, is qualified, yeah.
Do you want to go pull up the other bill, Mike, or are there other questions about this one or anything else you wanted to say about it?
No, I mean, it's a short bill, but it's not a simple bill. You know what I mean? It's like, it looks simple, but there's revenue consequences, Ways and Means, who's already looking at trying to change eligibility is gonna say this is gonna cost money.
Well, they have asked us to look at it first. So that's the order that we decided to go in for this, for all of these, actually. Representative Burke.
Michael, is there, I discussed this when, just before lunch from the committee. It seems to me that as a business person and just an understanding a small amount of economics, then if we were to reduce the penalty coming out of current use, that it would actually increase the amount of people who would take land out of current use. Is that something that the JFO would actually try to investigate as well, or are they surely gonna look at, oh, this is a difference of 6%, 10, here's the financials on it?
A great question. Yeah.
That's a great question, and I think it goes both ways. If you reduce that 10% to 6%, somebody who's not in use value right now might say, hey, I was planning to subdivide part of this in 15 years, but the 10% was too much for me to swallow, but now 6%, maybe I can factor that in. I'm gonna enroll my land in use value for that next 10 to 15 years. But it will say to somebody, especially with the development pressure that may occur on farmland. I mean, I think you heard from from Representative Kimball the other day that, you know, there's no land to develop in Woodstock except farmland, you know, because, and it's great land to develop because you've already leveled it. You plowed the soil. The rocks are gone mostly from the soil. And so it's easy to go in there with excavators and dig some foundations and put in some infrastructure. So if you lower it from 10 to 6, does that encourage people to pull out? It could. Could.
All right, thank you. Let's pull up 291.
So, does everyone know what posting of land is? So if you post your land right now, there's no penalty for that under use value. And what this bill would do, it would say if you post your land, you're going to pay a higher tax rate than the ag land or managed forest land when enrolled in use value. Not that you're disqualified or you can't apply for use value. It's that they will have to set a third rate because right now the current use advisory board sets a rate for ag land. It sets a rate for managed forest land. It's ultimately probably going to set a rate for reserve forest land, but it hasn't yet. It would need to set a third or fourth rate for this land that is posted, that's enrolled. And it is designed as a discouragement to post your land in order to further the constitutional right to hunt and fish in Vermont.
Representative Bryan.
Mike, can you just speak to what officially posting is? Like, I know it's very strict as far as you need a certain amount of signs, there's sign a certain distance and.
You need a sign first that is compliant with the Department of Fish and Wildlife's recommended signs. You can actually get the signs from the department if you want to. They need to be spaced a specific amount of space apart at your border of your property. I think it's
400 feet.
400 feet. And then you need to inform your town clerk and basically sign a notice that your land is enrolled in use value appraisal. And you have to do all of that annually.
Annually. Representative Moore.
Did they ever come up with a height designation?
I think it's, oh, I just did this for the purple paint bill. I think it's like 4 feet, 3.5 to 4 feet.
Is there an active purple paint bill?
There-
There will be. Okay.
There's a purple paint bill, yeah. Purple paint is a way that in many other states to designate that your land is posted against trespassing. But in some states, Kansas and a couple of other states, it's also a way to post that your land is not available for hunting, fishing, or trapping. So for hundreds of years, maybe, Vermont was the only state that had a constitutional right to hunt and fish. But in the last 30 years, states have been moving to do constitutional amendments to add it, mostly in the southern states and a few of the western states. And so they now have to deal with the dynamic that Vermont's been dealing with for hundreds of years, is how to enclose land to notify people that it's not available for hunting.
Representative Bosland, did you have a question earlier?
I did, but I think I'm good.
Okay.
And so they've come up with purple paint. You paint a tree or another landmark, again, at the border, 400 feet off the ground. Some states allow orange paint, but that freaks out the foresters because the foresters use orange paint to mark boundaries. Yeah, yeah. So. But anyway, this bill on page 2 would say when the current use advisory board is recommending values for eligible land for the current tax year, the board shall recommend that land posted against hunting, fishing, or trapping shall pay a higher tax rate for enrolled lands equal to 25% of the difference between a parcel's use value and the grand list value. So there will be that fourth amount. If you want to post, you post that at a penalty to yourself.
We had the board in last week, where Representative Chair of the board came in and talked a little bit about the role of the board and the process, the annual process they go through. So just remind us, the board shall recommend, who are they recommending to?
They recommend a PVR and that's who sets the rate.
The tax department, PVR.
Yeah.
Okay. Richard.
So is this just pertaining to hunting, fishing and trapping? If your land is, say you have a chunk of land and you save it for your family to hunt on, but the rest of your land's open and through that chunk of land, you have your family to hunt on for 2 weeks in November, 16 days specifically. The rest of the time it's open to the bass trails, Vassar trails and whatnot.
So your entire parcel's enrolled in use value, but you're only posting on a portion of that parcel. I think they would have to, you would probably have to fill out that. Have you probably seen the form when you have some land in managed forest land and some land in ag land, and you have to fill out the two different. So I think you'd probably have to fill out a third form.
Is there also, you can post your land against all trespassing too, or that's not allowed?
Well,
You can post your land against trespassing, but it's not necessarily the same as posting against hunting and fishing. For years, they were not the same thing. But people were putting out signs that said, no trespassing, no hunting, fishing, or trapping. But that sign actually didn't comply with the department's sign. So technically they weren't really posted. But then the department amended their sign and you can choose one of their alternatives. They have a couple of alternatives and you can use one that says no trespassing, no hunting or fishing. And no trespassing doesn't mean, if you just go out in the woods and see a no trespassing sign, it doesn't mean you can't go onto that land to hunt and fish. You can go onto that land to hunt and fish. It's not adequately posted for the purposes of excluding a person from hunting or fishing.
So as written, would this new language allow a landowner to say you can't trespass? So thinking about, we were discussing earlier, hiking or foraging as opposed to hunting and fishing. How does that fit in?
So this is just about hunting or fishing. So you could still post your land that's in use value against trespass. Remember, people can still go onto it to hunt or fish if it's not properly posted for hunting or fishing. The thing that people do though is that they post their land once in compliance and then they never re-enroll, never change the signs,
redate
them. And people think it's posted, but it's not. You actually at that point would need to go to the town clerk's office to determine whether or not the land was adequately posted.
We're getting into government affairs here a little bit, and
It's messy.
So let's take a couple more questions. Go ahead, Representative Boswell.
Yeah, just a quick question. So like in terms of the posting that, when you would post on your land, is there a size limit for that? Like, I mean, if you have an acre of property, do you have to post it to have nobody coming to hunt in your backyard? Or is there a minimum size lot that would apply to?
There's called the safety zone.
Yeah.
Well, you're not supposed to shoot within 500 feet of a building structure. And then you can create a safety zone even more than that around a structure. But then that's the only limitation. If you don't want a safety zone, you don't have to put up a safety
So
zone.
technically, even if somebody had like 5 acres, they probably need to post, or else somebody could come hunting in their yard as long.
Yes.
Yeah, Representative Morgan. Do you have a question or Representative Morgan? Question? No. Anybody else?
Just quickly on conservation easements. Are most of those allow hunting, fishing, recreation?
I can't say most of them do. Some of them do, some of them don't.
Okay, so it's,
So I think you'd have to talk to somebody from like the land trust about what they do.
All right, so we've pretty much covered the changes in the bill. Thank you for going through that. We're gonna hear hopefully next week from the tax department, JFO. Mike, thank you for offering to connect with them, and Sidonia will be in touch with them too. And other interested parties. One that I'm thinking of right away is the town clerks have an association, and it's the folks who are responsible for handling the posting. They may have an opinion, so we can ask them if they're interested. Okay, thank you, Mike, and have a good weekend.
Actually, like,
So next up, we're going to go back to the governor's recommended budget, and we have some folks in today from the Watershed Management Division. Hi,
Yes. Oh, this one.
Bethany?
Yeah, so my name is Bethany Sargent. I'm the Deputy Director of the Watershed Management Division, and I understand the committee would like to hear about the $850,000 that is part of the governor's proposed budget to support the Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations Program development.
That is correct. Yeah. Now, the committee may not know that they want to hear about this, but they do. I mean, just as you probably know, the Appropriations Committee takes pieces of the governor's proposed budget and asks one or more committee of jurisdiction to take a look. And I don't know, maybe you've already spoken to other committees, House committees about this, but I'm not sure that you have. So anyway, we want to be sure that there's an opportunity and that we speak to it.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. So as you may know, the Agency of Natural Resources is required to stand up a comprehensive CAFO permitting program. Right now, that program is staffed with 2 FTEs. We've proposed also through the governor's budget, 2 additional FTEs to support this work. But as you can imagine, the permitting program has a number of different needs in order to be fully operational. So a portion of that funding is anticipated to support database development work. So right now, the Agency of Agriculture has and maintains a water quality database that they use to track inspections, permitting, et cetera. So either, developing that database or, making changes to it so that the Agency of Natural Resources can use it for CAFO permitting, or standing up an entirely new database if that's, more cost effective. But we anticipate that, a significant portion of that funds will be to stand that up. That database needs the ability to track permitting, track inspections, be able to, contain nutrient management plans, and also be able to report to the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a requirement of the NPDES CAFO permitting. We also, because of the limited staffing and, because this program is being developed, we need to do a lot of work to assess the number of farms that will require CAFO permit coverage before we can fully evaluate the staffing needs. And so we envision that a portion of these funds may need to support, potentially contract inspectors to do that initial inspection so that we can understand what the more long-term staffing requirements will be for the CAFO program. Things as simple as field equipment, training as we're bringing in these new staff to be able to do these inspections. So there's a range of work and, whether it's contracted work or, potentially temporary employees that is necessary for the program's development.
Representative Nelson.
You wouldn't use the good work that's already done by the Department of Agriculture on permitting all these farms for large farm, medium farm, and small farm?
We do have a lot of that information, but right now we don't have the ability to access it in terms of what that information is in the water quality
So
database.
you're looking
So
for dollars so you can share
Ideally,
and not reinvent the wheel.
exactly. So ideally, we would be able to develop an access point for the Agency of Natural Resources to be able to access that database. It will need some tweaks because they are different permitting programs in terms of the way that the data, the type of data that it tracks, the way it displays, and then being able to build that bridge to be able to report to EPA that inspection information.
Bethany, I'm sorry that I didn't think to just have us quickly introduce ourselves so that you know who you're talking to. Let's just take a minute and a half to do that.
Certainly.
So I'm David Durfee. I am from Shaftesbury, Bennington County. Let's go around there.
I'm Leland Morgan. I represent Grand Isle County and the western portion of the town of Milton.
Jed Lipsky, represent Lamoille 1 District South.
Richard Nelson, Orleans 1, Derby.
Michelle Boslin, Wyndham 3, I'm from Westminster.
John O'Brien, Windsor Orange 1, Royalton and Tunbridge.
Windsor Supernaut, Windsor 4, Barnard, Pomfret, Bridgewater, West Hartford.
So
Thank you.
Donia's in the corner. She's
Oh.
one woman.
Next.
And Representative Burt stepped out to testify in another committee. He'll probably be back. And we should ask.
Yes, and with,
Yes,
excuse
thank
me.
you, committee members and chair. I'm Keith Laflamme, I'm Director of the Watershed Management Division at DEC and the division that houses the beginning of the CAFO program within it. We deal with water resource management across the state, both permitting and regulation, and also monitoring and assessment of our water resources.
Thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you have more that you wanted to?
No, I'm happy to entertain additional questions if the committee.
Yeah, and I'll just back up and say, so this committee has taken some testimony, heard a little bit about the background.
Mhm.
And we will, I'm sure we'll be hearing more because there's, and let me just stop there. What we're talking about here is the EPA's ongoing communication with the state about managing clean water quality on farms. That historically has been the purview of both agencies, essentially.
Correct.
We heard from maybe both agencies. Secretary Moore was in to go over the memo of understanding. There's a report due every year on that, and she shared your agency's report on that. There is pending legislation in the House currently. It's been introduced to address the issue in one way. There is likely to be legislation introduced in the Senate or maybe the House to address it a different way. And ultimately, the EPA's requirements will need to be met.
Correct.
And so part of that is setting up this database.
Yes. Yeah. Database and doing, having additional capacity to do the inspection work necessary to evaluate some of those longer term staffing needs for the program.
Is it imagined or envisioned that there'll be more inspections or more frequent inspections?
So one of EPA's requirements, it'd be as the delegated agency, the Agency of Natural Resources, we need to be the ones inspecting farms and making the determination as to whether or not they require a CAFO permit. And so, given the number of farms that could be subject to CAFO permitting or would be required to apply for a CAFO permit, there's an additional, that we have a need for additional capacity. How much is a question, is an open question. And so there's potential to use these funds to contract with inspectors. EPA has joined us on inspections in the past. We obviously do co-inspections with the Agency of Ag, but we need to be present on those inspections. In terms of estimates of the number of farms, there are 37 large CAFOs, roughly 100 medium CAFOs, and then upwards of 1,000 small farms. Obviously, with 2 FTEs at present, an additional 2 hopefully coming in September, once if we receive the proper approvals, there's still a significant amount of work to do in meeting those requirements.
Representative Nelson.
Personally, I'm not aware of any kind of inspection on a CAFO, a large farm, that doesn't have a member from ANR on it.
Mhm.
Maybe it happens at some of them, but not in my world.
That we haven't been on.
You've always been to our farm.
We have prioritized LFOs, so the large CAFOs, in terms of our limited capacity, just based on potential to, discharge and water quality, and based on those animal numbers. EPA has made clear in their communication to the agency that we need to be present on, for inspecting all farms that have the potential to discharge to surface waters to evaluate whether or not a CAFO permit would be necessary.
Representative O'Brien.
Is this an unfunded mandate, or will monies flow from EPA to support ANR's work here?
We receive money from EPA as a, NIPD's delegated state that supports the work of our department broadly. We have always had, NIP as part of our NIPD's delegation, CAFO permitting is a part of that. We will not be receiving any additional funding to meet these obligations of our delegation as a state.
Is there I know that we're only talking about, this is a one-time request to
Correct.
stand up this, whatever it is, database, et cetera.
Database, yeah.
Yeah. So we're not here to talk with you about staffing, although I think we heard that there's an additional 2 positions that are in the budget.
Mhm.
Just looking ahead, is there, over the course of, say, 10 years, is it likely that there will need to be more permanent full-time positions doing this work than there have been in the past?
Potentially part of our corrective action plan, which is it currently in draft form. We're making some revisions to it now based on initial feedback from EPA, requires the agency to report on additional staffing needs based on some of the initial assessment work and inspection work that we're doing in this year and next year. And so I think there is a question in terms of how much additional capacity may be required. And a lot of that gets to, to the number of farms that, that will require CAFO permitting.
So I think we heard that there's never been a CAFO permit issued in Vermont.
Correct. We have a medium CAFO general permit that is available for farms to apply for, but we haven't yet received any notices of intent for coverage under that general permit. We have not issued any individual CAFO permits.
You described it as a medium?
It's for medium CAFO, so medium farms. And in order to be eligible for coverage, you would need to meet all of the requirements of the CAFO general permit. And through an individual permit, there can be a compliance schedule. So if they don't yet meet all of those criteria, we can build in a compliance schedule over the 5-year term of the permit.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, thank you. Bethany, this has to do with when you refer to the EPA, this Boston office, is this the federal EPA?
We're working with Region 1, which is out of Boston. Mhm.
So I've observed a sort of serious effort down in Washington to diminish a lot of federal agencies or organizations' funding or reducing staffing, a lot of layoffs I'm hearing about. Has the EPA been subject to any of these reductions? Might impact any funding that you receive for this program?
Not yet that I'm aware of. Obviously, there are a lot of questions around federal funding broadly, but we're confident in terms of the requirements that have been laid out in our NPDES delegation and in recent letters from EPA that these requirements are necessary for Vermont to meet.
Representative Nelson.
Maybe this is too early in the process and maybe this isn't in your boilerplate. And if it isn't, just let me know and we'll save the questions for later. Is the bar going to be changed when Vermont stepped into this role 15, 20 years ago, whenever? We raised the bar above and beyond what EPA required. So even with a CAFO permit, if you were farming in New York and you have the rain event that equal to or greater than the 25-year, they're covered if you have a CAFO permit. In Vermont, would farmers be covered or not? Is the bar still set that we're not allowed to discharge?
With the CAFO permit, you're correct that that the CAFO permit essentially permits discharges above that 25-year storm. And so the CAFO permit would be designed to meet the federal requirements. Federal rule.
But that would only be good for 5 years.
The permit term would be for 5 years, correct?
The reason I asked is in 2023, all that additional rainfall amounted to millions of gallons of water having to be handled by farmers, tens of millions of gallons of water having to be handled by farmers. And as a farmer, thank you to Agriculture and ANR for giving us the extensions. And we had a lovely winter with no snow until January to achieve the goals. So I just wonder if that bar would come down or if it's still going to remain the high bar, which we're getting used to and meeting those challenges and having great results in lowering our TDS, total daily load.
Mhm.
I don't know if Representative Nelson said he's a farmer. So.
Yes, no, I understand that. Thank you.
Does it want to be?
So if I understand the question correctly, you're raising the bar referring to the no discharge permits, that is the LFO and the MFO.
Yes.
So the CAFO permits would permit a discharge above that 25-year storm. Some of the requirements of the CAFO permits are different than the LFO permits. So for example, the standard buffer width is 35 feet, which is different, as I understand it, than what's required through the LFO.
Yeah, LFO is 35 feet.
Is it-
CAFO, I think, is 100 feet. You are correct. I think if you have a CAFO permit, you're buffer. You can farm right up to the edge of the stream or the ditch or conveyance, but you can't apply manure within 100 feet of it.
I would have to consult the program manager, Abby Paycheck, in terms of the details of the technical details between the differences in the CAFO and the LFO, but happy to clarify that at a future date.
Send Abby right in.
Yeah.
She's good.
Are there other questions?
Well, what was the state that, was it New Hampshire that actually has E EP?
Yeah, so New
Do-
Hampshire and Massachusetts are not delegated states. They're two of few, do you know the number of there are 3 total states that are not delegated by EPA. So yes, both New Hampshire and Massachusetts, NIPD's permitting is through EPA Region 1.
But we don't have an option, say, to do that because of our TMDL agreement?
We, as a delegated state, so we issue all of the NIPD's permits, and so that includes wastewater permits for direct discharges from municipal and industrial wastewater treatment facilities. We also have NIPD's stormwater permits that we issue as delegated by EPA. So the dedelegation petition that was submitted by the Conservation Law Foundation, Vermont Natural Resources Council, and Lake Champlain Committee that was, submitted to EPA and making the case that Vermont's not meeting its obligations of our NIPD's delegation. So the recourse for that would be that EPA, if we're not meeting those obligations, would take back all of our NIPD's permitting. So they would remove Vermont's delegated authority to issue all of our NIPD's permits, not just CAFO.
The history of New Hampshire and Massachusetts is that they never were delegated.
Correct.
So it wasn't, they didn't have a delegation.
Correct.
Representative Lipsky.
Apologize, do this often. What does it
NIP
stand for?
It stands for National Pollutant Elimination Discharge System. So it's an acronym that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's, the goal of it is really to reduce pollution from point source discharges into waters of the US over time. And so that is, as I mentioned, wastewater discharges from our wastewater treatment facilities. That can be construction or stormwater permits,
National.
well, discharge elimination system.
Sorry, does the NIPD's also cover the 3-acre rule?
The 3-acre rule is a state-based stormwater permit. So that's our part of our operational permitting. So some of Vermont's stormwater regulations go beyond the federal regulations.
Read that as most of them.
Are there any other questions or anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. I'm happy to, if there are additional questions that any of the committee members consider, I'm happy to come back in or follow up by email.
So, yeah, we'll need to, we've been asked anyway in our committee letter to House Appropriations to weigh in on this request, this one-time request. And in theory, also the ag agency's staffing. And I guess that's sort of a related question. You're not able to speak to the ag agency, or you're not representing the ag agency.
Right.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does this money, would it be coming out of that big water quality fund, or is it?
I think it's out of the general fund.
Oh, general.
I think this 850,000 is out of the general fund. Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Okay, why don't we take 5 minutes to stretch? We've got a